For anyone who played Tekken 2, Baek Doo San seemed just like a villain, a cold blooded dojo destroyer, a man who attacked innocent people and left a trail of destruction wherever he went. But hidden behind that rage, behind those devastating taekwondo kicks, and that reputation for destruction, is one of the most heartbreaking origin stories Tekken has ever dared to tell. A boy who grew up in poverty, whose mother disappeared and left him alone, who accidentally killed the father he loved more than anything in the world, and who spent the rest of his life carrying that weight. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the story of Baekdoosan. For anyone who needs to understand just how far Baekdoosan fell, you need to understand where it all started. His father was a Taekwondo champion, respected, skilled, a man who dedicated his life to the martial art that would define the entire Doosan family. Then came the injury, a career ending blow that stole everything his father had worked for. And here is where Bake's story takes a turn that nobody in the Tekken community yet talks about properly, to be fair. Because his father didn't just lose his career, he lost himself. The injury sent him into a spiral. Alcohol became his escapism, and eventually, his father ended up in jail. Meanwhile, the family was left with nothing, plunged into poverty, struggling to survive. And then, as if things couldn't get any worse, his mum disappeared. No warning, no farewell, just vanished, leaving Bake and his siblings completely alone. Think about what that could mean. A young boy, father in jail, mum vanishing, siblings to look after, no financial money, no stability, no safety. That is the world Baek Doo San grew up in. That's Hwoarang's master. And yet, through all of that, he trained. He stayed disciplined. Taekwondo was his father's legacy. And no matter what happened around him, Baek refused to let that die. For anyone who's ever made a mistake they can never take back, what happened next will kind of stay with you. Baek's father escaped from jail, not to run, not to hide, but to come back home to his family. A broken man trying to do one last thing right, be there for the children he had abandoned. But years of prison and malnourishment had left him physically destroyed. And when father and son finally stood together again, they did what they had always done. They sparred. The martial art that had defined their family, the bond they shared through Taekwondo, the language they spoke without words. And during that sparring session, Bake accidentally killed his father, the man he respected above all else in the world, gone by his own hands. Not in anger. That was not his intent. Just a moment of tragic misjudgment between a son and a father who's already weak. Just a moment of tragic misjudgment between a son and a father. That moment, that single irreversible second, broke something inside Baek Doosan that never fully healed. And everything that came after, the rage, the destruction, the dojo attacks, all of it traces back to that moment. A son trying to outrun grief that was always going to catch him. For anyone who played Tekken 2 and wondered why Baek Doo San was destroying dojos across Korea, well, now you know. It wasn't cruelty, it was grief wearing the mask of rage. I've been there, I'm sure we've all been there. Grief hits you when you least expect it. And after his father's death, Baek fell apart completely. He fell behind everything he knew and took to the streets. He became a pit fighter, a man who turned his pain into violence because he didn't know what else to do. And then a rival martial arts school found out about his past. They knew what he had done. They knew the secret that could destroy everything he had left, and they used it. They blackmailed him, forced him to attack dojos, including one belonging to a certain martial law in San Francisco. Bake trashed law school, beat his students senseless, and then he disappeared. Now, he wasn't doing this out of pleasure. He was doing it because someone had their hands around his darkest secret and was squeezing. Ladies and gentlemen, that's not a villain story. That's a true victim story. A man who's already broken, killed his dad by mistake, broken further by people who saw his pain as a weapon to use that against him. Now, for anyone who followed the rivalry between Baek Doo San and martial law, their meeting in the King of Iron Fist Tournament 2 was inevitable. Law had returned to find his dojo destroyed, his students whooped, his life's work dismantled, and he wanted answers, and they met in the tournament and Law beat him. But what happened after that defeat tells you everything about Baek Doo San really was underneath all the pain. But what happened after that defeat tells you everything about Baek and how much pain he was holding on to. He sat alone with a locket containing a photo of himself and his dad. He thought about who his father was before the injury, before the liquor, before the jail time, the great man that he had been, the man he looked up to, the martial artist who passed everything down to his son. And for the first time, Baek forgave himself. Not completely, but enough to stop running. Enough to start living again. Now, for anyone who knows Hwoarang, the fiery Korean taekwondo slash kickboxer, whatever you want to call it, right? He's been in Tekken since Tekken 3. And you know the name of Baek Doo San from 1 and 2. I mean from 2. And in Tekken Tag. Because between Tekken 2 and Tekken 3, Baek found something he hadn't had since his father died. Because between Tekken 2 and Tekken 3, Baek found something he hadn't had since his dad died. He found purpose. He began teaching Taekwondo, first to military personnel, then to a young street fighter who had more raw talent than anyone he's actually ever seen. That's Hwoarang. And in Hwoarang, Baek found the son he never had. He was strict with him, he was demanding of him, pushing him harder than anyone else, because Baek knew something about wasted potential. He lived it, and he refused to let Hwoarang make the same mistakes. During this time, Ogre came. The so-called god of fighting attacked Baek and left him for dead. Hwoarang, believing his master was gone, entered Tekken 3 strictly just to avenge him. But Baek wasn't dead. He was in a coma. When he finally woke over a year later, he discovered his student had been fighting the world's greatest warriors in his name. That moment, a master waking up to find his student had been carrying his legacy, is one of the most quietly beautiful moments in Tekken history, in my opinion. But it deserves to be talked about, because I do miss Baek Doo San. For anyone who followed Baek into Tekken 5, his final chapter is the most Baek Doo San thing that could possibly happen. When he entered the tournament, not for revenge, not for glory, not for financial gain, it was actually to test his student, Hwoarang, to see how far his student had come, to measure the progress of the young man he had dedicated years of his life to shape him. And when Hwoarang was seriously injured fighting Devil Jin, Baek withdrew immediately. His student was hurt. Nothing else mattered because he lost his dad. That is the complete arc of Baek Doo San. From a boy who accidentally killed his dad to a man who found redemption in becoming a father figure that he never had. From rage and destruction to sacrifice and love. From villain to one of Tekken's most quietly heroic characters. And Tekken 8 left him behind without a word. Now, for anyone who grew up playing Tekken like me, Baek was always just Hwoarang's master. And when I done a deep dive and I'm doing research on him, I didn't know about this. And his storyline is actually pretty tragic. And the developers and the storytellers really went in depth. Hwoarang is not as deep as Baek Doo San. Now, I already done a video on why I think Baek Doo San should come back, on his gameplay and why I think he's harder to use than Hwoarang, you know. I will link that in the video, but this video was really talking about Baek Doo San and his storyline, you know, a master, a mentor, a man who found his redemption not in winning tournaments, but in shaping a student into someone better than himself. And you see in Tekken 8, Hwoarang has got most of Baek's moves. So that's for me not a villain story. That's one of the greatest stories Tekken has ever told. Now, let me know what you guys think in the comments. If you like the video, give it a like. Subscribe for more. Ozzy is out. Peace.